All right, you're very welcome along to our Week 7 preview of the NFL season here on OTB. We're going to be speaking a little bit later on with Cian, and we'll get to Sam in just a minute. The NFL send us out these reports every week about how amazing the NFL is, and their headline this week is "More excitement lies ahead as NFL enters Week 7. If points mean prizes, well then there are a lot of prizes being given out because we've had more points than we've ever had in any NFL season to date." Sam Monson, good afternoon to you. Good morning to you where you are. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Jer. How about you?
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about the bevy of points that we've seen, the incredible record-breaking season that we're seeing in all sorts of different ways. We're like already 21 touchdowns ahead of the most touchdowns ever scored in a season up to this point. So is this just because of the rule changes?
Yeah, I mean, this is the NFL's dream. This is everything the NFL has been trying to achieve over the past decade plus of, every single rule change all the way along has all been designed around promoting points, keeping their quarterbacks healthy and on the field, because the NFL believes that the thing people want to see is points, yards, offense. It's not defense. It's not low-scoring defensive battles. They just want quarterbacks out there making the game all about passing and making it all about putting up points. And so every single rule change or emphasis or any adjustment they've made over the years has all been designed around just keeping these guys on, putting up more and more points. And that Kansas City versus New England game we saw on Sunday Night Football was really the embodiment of what the NFL has been pursuing, almost this arena football league kind of game where offense is everything, and it really just comes down to the number of possessions, the number of times you have the ball, because defenses can't stop anybody. Now, is part of that to do with the fact that neither New England or Kansas City currently have very good defense, very good defenders, very good scheme, or is this, is there a lot of things going on here at the moment? Yeah, I mean, certainly Kansas City don't have a good defense. They have one of the worst defenses in the league, and a couple of their best players are missing. Justin Houston was down. Eric Berry has been day-to-day for weeks at a time at this stage. I think they were missing a couple of other guys from the secondary as well. They were very beat up and already a bad unit, so that's not surprising. The Patriots, they don't have the best defense in the league, but it's not terrible. But we at Pro Football Focus, we were kind of trying to rank defenses for a video earlier in the week. We were like, we should start this list at 15. Like, there shouldn't be a top 5. All of these defenses are average at best. You just can't play defense in today's NFL. It's very, very hard to slow down offenses because there's almost nothing you can do consistently that quarterbacks and NFL offenses and schemes aren't able to combat and overcome.
Sam, I know you're a rugby fan, so you've seen exactly the same thing happen in rugby where the tackle has been far more closely defined. You're not allowed to hit low, you're not allowed to hit above the nipple line effectively. Otherwise, you end up getting, in some cases, red cards, and there's a lot of debate about that. It seems like all sport realises that if it's going to have a sustainable future, if the parents of the next generation are going to allow their kids to play as opposed to sit on the couch and play esports, well then it has to be a safe sport. So part of the rule changes are designed to increase offense, but part of it is also designed to make the mums and dads happy enough to bring little Johnny along and push him out there to be the next superstars of the future too.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, and there's been a move for player safety along with the move in rugby, and it's very, very similar in that regard. The difference is that the moves in rugby are typically universal. They apply to everybody. So, the same tackle has become illegal for everybody on the field. In the NFL, it's like they pick and choose when to care about player safety. So, woe betide you touch a quarterback in a way that's deemed too aggressive or too dangerous, too harmful for the quarterback. But if you're a running back in open space, you're pretty much fair game. Or if you're a defender that's trying to come in for a tackle, you can get stiff-armed to the ground, hand in the face, helmet being wrenched to the side, not a problem. But if you're a quarterback, you can't even fall on that guy anymore. The NFL is literally expecting defenders to, in the act of falling on a quarterback, somehow leap out of the way so that he doesn't land on him with all of his body weight. That's the bit of that just it makes the player safety thing ring hollow. It's that if you're going to go for player safety, I'm all for that, but let's apply it universally to everybody. If you're going to take away head contact out of the game, again, same thing. Let's do it for everybody. Let's not pick and choose who we decide to care about.
If you're the business owners of the NFL who ultimately are the ones deciding on these rule changes, then I guess they're pretty happy with how this season is going, because this is what people are talking about, is like, oh, has the game gone too soft? Are there too many people scoring? As opposed to, why is nobody watching the sport anymore? And why are all those guys kneeling out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, this is exactly what they've been trying to achieve for a number of years. And it's no coincidence that every time a quarterback gets injured on, a specific type of hit, that specific type of hit tends to become illegal pretty quickly. So, back in 2008, the shot to the knee with Tom Brady, it put him out for the 2008 season. Almost immediately, that hit became illegal. You can't hit a quarterback below the knee anymore unless you're blocked into the guy. Last year or the year before, it was the Aaron Rodgers deal. It was Anthony Barr falling on top of Aaron Rodgers, broke his collarbone. Now you can't do that anymore. So they've specifically gone out to craft these things to create, to make sure quarterbacks stay healthy in the pocket. Now, this year, obviously, we've lost Jimmy Garoppolo, but it was a non-contact injury. He tore his knee up essentially before he got hit in the head as he was scrambling out of bounds. There's basically nothing the league can do about that. But outside of that, they've pretty much succeeded. The quarterbacks are better protected than ever, and that means they're able to do that, to pull the strings in these offenses and just march the ball down the field.
Technically, it was as Jimmy Garoppolo was scrambling in instead of out. At least if he'd scrambled out, then perhaps his knee wouldn't have given way, because it would have been a fairly natural movement to run away from the trouble as opposed to running to it. But Jimmy had to show that he's a hard ass, and all of a sudden the San Francisco 49ers are in pole position for the number 1 pick next year.
Yeah, although CJ Beathard is not a terrible quarterback. It's the ironic thing about this is that he's a reasonable backup, I think. He showed last year and this year that he's never likely to be a Jimmy Garoppolo. But for a guy that was a mid-round draft pick, I think he's a capable backup. He's able to come in there, not play terribly. He made some big-time throws in that game against the Packers. The 49ers generally, him as well, have been turning the ball over more than is necessary to win games with a quarterback that's that capped in his performance. But he's not a terrible backup to have and be kind of stuck with over the rest of the season.
Well, when you think that Kirk Cousins was exactly the same kind of mid-round pickup under the Shanahan regime the year that RG3 was picked, it's like it is possible for quarterbacks to have a life in the NFL even if they aren't a first-round pick or the number 1 overall pick or somebody who kind of lands in the perfect situation.
And it's also possible for quarterbacks to develop over time. It's much harder now than it was in the past, where you had, way more practice time and coaches got years in the same system before they were fired and sent elsewhere. But you do get guys. It's almost like we're spoiled these days because of quarterbacks that come in from day one and look amazing. So, Patrick Mahomes, I know he sat for a year, but Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, going back a few years, so many quarterbacks now get it from the instant they hit the field, and it's almost warped perceptions where you think if a guy doesn't show you it from day one, he's never going to do it. But you do get quarterbacks, even now, that get better over time, and suddenly this guy actually looks like a viable quarterback down the line because he's had time to learn, he's had time to develop, especially a mid-round pick. Where these guys clearly weren't ready from the get-go. That's why they were mid-round picks. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a guy like Beathard does improve over the years and becomes more than just a useful backup to have.
One of the other big stories this week was about Joey Bosa's little brother deciding that he didn't want to play his final year of college football, come back from the injury that he suffered at the moment, and that he's going to sit out his final year of college and be fully fit by the time the draft process happens next year. We saw a little bit of this happen in recent seasons where at the end of the year players would opt not to go to a bowl game and decide that they were going to not risk winning a bowl with their college and instead go straight and be prepared for the draft. Primarily because they get no money for their college careers and they're getting multi-million-dollar contracts the second they walk into the NFL. And we've seen players do their ACL or blow out their knee fairly horrifically in bowl games or in the last few plays, the lethal weapon scenario where it's like, I'm one last day from retirement, Rich. Yeah. Why am I doing this shit? And it's like you can see this happening again and again and again from now on, surely, where the best college players decide, I don't really need to play my final year in college. What am I going to get?
Well, that's the thing. It's not so much that it's going to happen more and more. It's that the line is going to move to the point where, when these guys decide it's not worth the risk anymore. So a bowl game made a lot of sense for a long time. It's one final game. The season is decided. If you're not in a sort of college championship kind of situation, I mean, who cares? There's nothing on the line for me other than the college winning this bowl, so I'm out. That makes sense. Now you're getting guys where, okay, I've been banged up a little bit this season. I'm going to miss half the year anyway. It's not worth it. You're going to get to a point where surefire first round picks are literally going to bail on the whole season. It's like, I'm not even going to play the final season of college. I'm just going to work out, kill time, and come back. That is not too far away, and that I think is probably going to be the watershed moment where the NCAA and college tries to figure out a solution to this, because up until then I think it's made some sense, and it's been a much smaller individual case by case basis. But at the point where their star players are saying it's not worth the risk for me to even play a final season, given how high my draft stock is, I'm just going to sit here and work out for the NFL draft. That I think is the point that's going to spur the NCAA into some kind of action, though it's tough to know what they can do about it.
How much tape do you guys at PFF need on a college footballer before you can say that we've seen enough plays, enough action within those plays to classify this person where we have a realistic assessment of where he is?
I mean, the more tape is always better, but I think it depends how good the tape is. Nick Bosa was our number one edge rusher in the country for the past couple of seasons. He's been head and shoulders above pretty much everybody else. At this point, I don't know that another half season of tape is going to do any good. We know where he is compared with everybody else. That's unlikely to change over the next few months. Even if he plays badly coming back off this injury, you would, to some extent, explain that away by the fact that he's coming back hurt. It's almost meaningless, the back end of the season for him. For other guys, though, if you don't have that defined level of tape, you don't have a couple of seasons of saying, this guy is fantastic, there's 2 years of phenomenal play where he's better than anybody else, if he's somewhere in the middle of the pack, those seasons do matter. It may be the difference between being a first-round pick, being a second-round pick. And for those guys, that's millions of dollars aside from anything else. So those guys, there is something on the line. If you're a guy who, Joey Bosa is a consensus top 5 pick already. Now, that may adjust. Some people may move him around, whatever, but pretty much everybody is aligned on the fact that this guy is a top 5 NFL draft pick. That's not changing. That is millions and millions of dollars, and the only thing he can do at this point is hurt his draft stock.
Yeah, so precisely. Like, for the very elite players, we're going to see 2 years of tape would be ample. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think if you got 2 solid seasons of standout tape, the third season is probably not moving the needle.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's interesting, because then you can come to a conclusion and say, if you're the agent or the manager or the player or the player's family, look, you've given up absolutely everything. This college has sweated the asset that they've given you by giving you 3 years of education or 2 years of education or whatever it is. You're going to be rich enough to be able to pay this college for your final season when you retire. Let's go, kid. Is there any way that you start seeing players come out a little bit early for the draft, or isn't that where the NCAA have a little bit of a pull on players? You can't do the same in the NFL the way that you can declare early for the NBA draft. I think I'm a little bit hazy on those rules.
Yeah, there's still the rule that you need to be essentially out of high school for 3 seasons. So they can't declare any earlier than they're declaring right now, but you can essentially decide, look, I'm coming to the NFL draft. It's just that I need to sit here for the next 12 months before I can do it. So that's going to be the issue. What the NCAA has to figure out is there a way of, prohibiting these guys somehow from being able to just skip their final year of college? Or is there some way they can incentivize them for playing that final year? I think ultimately this is all working its way down to the idea that the current business model for the NCAA is unsustainable. It's exploitative. It's these players are legitimately generating a huge amount of money for these college football programs, and they're not getting paid. Now, the argument has always been they're getting a free education. It's a scholarship that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And while that is true, we're reaching this point where it just isn't worth the risk to these guys. So they're going to be sitting out unless you figure out some way of incentivizing them from not doing that. Yeah, it almost feels like there is a business opportunity for a feeder league for the NFL to rival the college game. I mean, obviously you don't have the rivalry, but it's surely a TV company could come up with the cash for... Anyway, that's probably a different story that we could tease out someday, but I definitely think there's something there. Like, you hear about these college games where there's no landing slots at the private airplane airports because the alumni are coming in
And they've all donated 10, 15, 20 million to the football programme at various stages, and the players are there getting their education. It's like, there's kind of fairly significant imbalance here somewhere along the way, where the university's endowments are billions and billions and billions. The TV rights deals are billions.
And the kind of draconian punishments around what players can and can't do. You know, players can't sell their own gear. You know, you just sell look, I use these cleats, they're done, I'm not using them anymore, here's my boots, give me $50.
Yeah.
Now you're getting suspended for that. That's how absurd the rules are in terms of players not being able to make money off their own image rights until they hit the professional level. Like that's absurd. I can't see a scenario whereby that lasts for too much longer, because there's too much money at stake. And it's starting to drive these players away.
When you were talking a little bit earlier on about the video you were making for the top defences, something akin to the best defence so far, or at least one of the most consistent defences, has been the Baltimore Ravens, who are 4-2. The Saints are in Baltimore this weekend. Sean Payton's record against Baltimore is 0-3, which I thought was just an interesting little tidbit here. So obviously he's very highly motivated to try and win this game, but where are the Ravens at as a defence at the moment? How coherent is their scheme? The people actually affecting that scheme? Why have they become a very solid team that suddenly everybody's going, oh, hang on a second, you guys are pretty good?
Yeah, one of the most consistently above average defenses in a league where there is nothing better than above average on defense at the moment. I think they're strong the way they've typically always been strong. This Ravens defense is they're very powerful up front. They can stop the run without having to try, which is an important thing. And they're fantastic on coverage on the back end. Marlon Humphrey, their first-round draft pick a couple of years ago, has developed into a really good corner. He's currently a top 20 graded guy at PFF. They're getting Jimmy Smith back. The safety duo of Eric Weddle and Tony Jefferson have been playing really well. So they're strong up front and on the back end, and it forces teams to be creative to try and exploit the holes in the middle, which is always harder to do because, you know, by definition, you're just giving teams a smaller area and a much more defined target to try and exploit that middle of the field option where things can go bad if, you know, a guy takes a wrong step or a misread or, you know, there's just a lucky deflection along the line, the ball goes up in the air and that creates turnovers. So yeah, I think this Ravens defense, it's been the same kind of scheme and system for a while. They're very used to what they're doing. And they're just well drilled. So it is, you're right. It is as good as a defense as there is in the league right now.
There was talk that Harbaugh was on a hot seat, and there was like a little bit of suggestion that maybe he was coming to the end of his time there. Obviously, the last draft was Ozzie Newsome's last final draft in charge of doing that. So the change has been made within the management structure. It's not going to be the head coach for now. But as we always see, a general manager comes in and he's looking and saying, well, you're not my coach. You're somebody else's coach. In this case, it is a Super Bowl winning coach with a long track record of success. So is Harbaugh just reasserting himself here and coming back to the level that we actually knew he was at, that there's been a little bit of a wobble from the team in recent seasons, but that he's got the ship straight again?
I think Harbaugh's a good coach. What it's going to come down to is the Joe Flacco situation and the transition to potentially Lamar Jackson or another quarterback. You know, Flacco stepped up his game a little bit this season. He's had some good games, but he's also had some really bad games. And we've seen the old Joe Flacco is still there. Lamar Jackson at the moment, all we're seeing from him is, you know, these gimmick plays and this package that they have for him whereby he basically comes on the field and runs a sweep from the quarterback position while Joe Flacco stands off on the sideline looking bored and a little bit pissed off that he's subjected to this. But ultimately it's going to come down to probably what kind of quarterback Lamar Jackson can be in the NFL. And I think he's a fascinating quarterback because he's got the potential to be a player, but he's never going to be a conventional NFL quarterback. He just isn't accurate enough to do that. He's very accurate in specific big-time plays, but just over the long period of time, he's always going to miss too many plays. But you can turn him into a very good quarterback by exploiting what he is fantastic at. So I think their ability to transition from Flacco to Lamar Jackson is probably going to be what determines how long Harbaugh's around for.
There does appear to be a model for what you should do with an auxiliary quarterback or a second quarterback across the field from them this week. The Saints appear to have found the perfect scenario where they have two proper quarterbacks, one in Teddy B, who's sitting on the bench happy and ready to go, and then they also do have a trick play genius in their ranks who's able to do that role.
Yeah, Taysom Hill he's a fun quarterback. He was this running quarterback at BYU, and they've kind of created him into this jack-of-all-trades gimmick player. It's not that they do what the Ravens do with Lamar Jackson and bring him on the field and just run sweeps with him all day. But he's like their kick returner. He plays on special teams. Like he's one of the gunners on the kickoff unit. He's running down there trying to tackle people at 100 miles an hour. Quarterbacks do not do that ever. I literally cannot think of another quarterback that has played special teams the way Taysom Hill does. So I think, honestly, one of the biggest parts of his kind of gimmick package, if you like, is I think the rest of that team are genuinely kind of excited when he's on the field because he's such a good story. This guy who clearly loves just being out there playing, whether it's special teams, whether it's returning kicks. And every time he does anything positive, I think everybody's kind of lifted for it. So I think that has this effect, this galvanizing effect, in a way it doesn't in Baltimore. And the other thing is the dynamic at quarterback is clearly different because Flacco's sitting there looking across at Lamar Jackson under center thinking that guy's trying to take my job.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of annoyed at it. Drew Brees has he's watching this happen. He's happy for the guy as well. He's under no threat whatsoever that Taysom Hill is going to take his job. So I think it's a slightly different dynamic there as well. Plus, the team is so happy for the guy.
Yeah, Taysom Hill is also like 28 and has been on a different. Was he on the Dolphins for a while and then got cut? Like, it's a weird reinvention that you probably have to be as self-confident and as random as Sean Payton is to be able to pull something like this off. Because if Hugh Jackson was to try this, everybody would go, oh my God, I can't believe, look at that. He's got that guy who used to be a quarterback out there as a gunner. Sean Payton does it. It works a little bit and he's a genius. That's kind of how success dictates the narrative a little bit in the NFL.
Yeah, well, every prospect that comes out of BYU, I think, is 28, just because they're all Mormons that have been on a mission for a couple of years at some point during their lives. But yeah, you're right. You do need a certain level of built-in credibility to start screwing around with the quarterback position, particularly when it comes to gimmick plays and a package for a certain guy. And the bottom line with Sean Payton is that he's had a consistent track record with offense, and it's working. So as long as it's working, nobody's going to look at it and say, this is a stupid idea.
They've conceded an average, the Ravens have conceded an average of 12.8 points. The Saints have conceded an average of 28 points. What type of a game do you expect this to be, Sam, in the end?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of Joe Flacco we get, because that Saints defense hasn't been the same unit as it was a year ago, but they flashed the ability to do that. Up front, Cameron Jordan has been a little bit hot or cold this year, and he's their best edge rusher, their most dominant player. He's going to be going up against a couple of tackles in Baltimore that have been really good so far this season. And then the Saints' back end just hasn't been as strong as a year ago. Marshawn Lattimore hasn't played nearly as well, and he's been a bit banged up. So that secondary kind of needs to step up. But really, the Baltimore offense comes down to what Joe Flacco is going to show up. We've had good Joe Flacco at times this season, and then they've got a viable offense, and they look like a very good team. When you get bad Joe Flacco again, you just end up with this check down, slow marching, kind of hard work offense. It's just not able to. It's certainly not able to keep pace with a team that's able to put up points, but then their defense should be able to keep the score low. So I think it really comes down to which Joe Flacco shows up. You get good Joe Flacco, this should be a really good game. If you don't, there's a risk that it's all on the Baltimore defense and how much they can limit the Saints.
One last game I wanted to ask you about. The Wembley game this week is the Tennessee Titans at the LA Chargers. Obviously, the game is in London. I'm sure when the Chargers were like, yeah, we'll go to London, no problem. Sure, we'll probably have as many away fans in Wembley as we do when we're at home. They're actually really good. They're in games. Yeah. They're conceding points, but then they're also capable of dropping a ton of points really quickly. Is this the year that finally they get everything together?
Yeah, it's tough to know. Everybody has been talking up the Chargers for years, and they always seem to get struck with this injury crisis that derails their season. And it threatened to happen right at the start of this year. They lost Hunter Henry, their tight end, who looked like one of the great new young tight ends in the league, I think before the season even started. And they've lost a couple of other guys to injury. But they seem to have kind of stopped the rot at the moment, particularly on defense, which it's been their, I don't want to say a concern because it hasn't been terrible, but again, it's it was a good unit a year ago, particularly in coverage. It was our number one ranked coverage unit last season, and we expected big things from them again because the talent was still pretty much the same. But it just hasn't been the same unit. And really the only change has been Joey Bosa being hurt. And while that definitely makes an impact, you're taking away 70-odd pressures over a season, you're taking away a big impact player on the defensive line, it doesn't really explain why guys like Casey Hayward and Desmond King in the secondary just haven't been the same guys in coverage. And that's where they've been struggling. But the offense is definitely firing. Phillip Rivers remains one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They now have a kind of stable of weaponry. Keenan Allen is a great receiver. He's very hard to cover. His route running is extremely tricky off the line of scrimmage. And then they've got that duo in the backfield of Melvin Gordon on a kind of per snap basis. He's just been doing incredible stuff. That offense is really, really good. And if the defense can just get its act in order, they could definitely be a challenging team down the stretch.
Tennessee, they're 14.5 points scored on average, obviously after a shutout against the Ravens last week and giving up just 17.8. They're like this team that you feel has something inside them and it just can't belch it out.
Yeah, so their defense is pretty good. Again, it's the better unit there. Marcus Mariota, the quarterback, is the thing that's kind of defining this team at the moment. And he's just... Not only has he not taken the next step forward and become this good quarterback that everybody thought he could be as a number 2 overall pick, but if anything, he's gone backwards. He's regressed. And for the second year in a row, he currently has a higher passer rating under pressure than he does when kept clean in the pocket. And that just doesn't ever happen. You know, almost always when guys are pressured, their passer rating drops. They get worse. It's an average of like a 35-point drop in passer rating when guys are pressured. But Mariota's been playing better when he's been under pressure. And it's not because he's playing particularly well under pressure. It's because he's so bad from a clean pocket. And that just shouldn't happen for a guy who's the number 2 overall pick. You know, this team basically punted every single drive last week. The only drive they had that they didn't punt on was the final one of the game where they ran out of time, you know, before they were able to score. So it was a real kind of case study, perfect storm of just offensive ineptitude.
Yeah, not a great thing when you own several of them in Dynasty. Anything else we should be looking forward to this week?
The Kansas City-Cincinnati game, I think, will be a fun one as well. Cincinnati have some real pass rush up front. They've got talent on the back end as well. William Jackson finally had a good game after struggling a little bit to open the season. And obviously this Kansas City offense is the great irresistible force that everybody is trying to contain. I think it's the Bengals... It's a game I think is going to go one of two ways. Either the Bengals defense is able to do a reasonable job of forcing mistakes out of that Chiefs offense, or like every other Chiefs game, they're able to just blow them out of the water because that offense is too formidable. Yeah,
there is a sense that Cincinnati have a real team and a balanced team. Enough of their star players are still fit. Andy Dalton is at least being competent and not losing games. And the defense has always been pretty good, right?
Yeah, I think that defense is good. It's got one of the best pass rushing rotations up front. That's a really big thing. They've got good players on the back end. What's interesting is, so typically when Tyler Eifert is healthy, their tight end, who's just had a miserable injury record over his career, when he's healthy, it's a completely different offense because he provides this secondary weapon to A.J. Green that just opens everything up and makes things easier for everybody. When he goes down, they just struggle so much worse. But so far this season, they've been able to patch up the loss of Tyler Eifert because Tyler Boyd has emerged as the slot weapon inside. And it's kind of having the same effect that it does when you have a healthy Tyler Eifert. So as long as Tyler Boyd is able to keep going well, I think that offense is going to be like it's looked in the past, back in 2015, say, when you had a healthy Eifert all season. And that's when you get the best Andy Dalton because he's got more than one guy to throw the ball to.
Sam, great stuff. Thanks a million. Enjoy the weekend. Cheers. Sam Monson there. You can get him at PFF_Sam, and of course you'll see him on Sky Sports coverage every Sunday. PFF worth knocking about if you are interested in any of the kind of statistical details and analysis. They have a fantasy package and they also have a gambling package to help you try and beat the spread. Speaking of which, we're going to get Sue in to try and make some money for us with some picks a little bit later on the show. We'll get to Cian in a moment, but first I think we can bring you some of the scores or the rest of the fixtures for the coming weekend. Yeah, okay, so these are the fixtures this week. The Thursday night fixture, many of you will not be downloading this or watching this before this is over. It's the Broncos at the Cardinals, and it's a bit of a dud game, to be honest. Although maybe the Cardinals, Josh, is going to turn out to be decent, and they might have found a way to start getting David Johnson the ball. And maybe they have found themselves a wide receiver. The rest of the games, the early kickoff is an early afternoon kickoff. 2:30 our time, Titans at Chargers. That one is in London. We've just been talking about it there with Sam. The slate of normal 6 o'clock kickoffs. The Texans at the Jags, the Panthers at the Eagles, the Vikings at the Jets. We'll talk a little bit about that and Sam Darnold and how he's getting on. The Patriots at Mitchell Trubisky's Bears in Soldier Field. It is the Bills at the Colts. The Bills not entirely crap. Turns out they've got a brilliant defence, and the Colts have really, really struggled to put anything around Andrew Luck. He's not quite back to being Andrew Luck just yet. The Browns at the Bucs with Jameis Winston back and losing last week. The Lions at the Dolphins with their amazing overtime win, and Frank Gore still rumbling away at the ripe old age and all the way into the history books himself at the weekend. The Saints at the Ravens is the 9:05 kickoff. That's going to be a really good game. That traditional old school belief system that offense wins games, defense wins championships. The Ravens, I mean, if you were to pick a wild card at this point, it wouldn't really be that wild, but the Ravens must be in the shake-up for any conversation about Super Bowl potential winners. The Cowboys at the Redskins, the madness of last week is going to get explained to us right now by Cian. The Rams at the 49ers, also kicking off at 9:25 Irish time. Late Sunday night, it is the Bengals at the Chiefs, so you want to stick that one on record. And then Monday Night Football is Odell Beckham Jr.'s Giants against the Atlanta Falcons. So not sure we're going to have time to talk about that one. We'll definitely talk about it on OTB AM next week. But I think Cian Fahey is there with us. Cian, how are you doing?
That Monday Night Football game is probably worth talking about, since everyone in New York is already blaming Odell for their season being lost. Yeah,
okay, well, let's do that then. So John Mara was saying, shut the fuck up, ODB. Who do you think?
Yeah, the irony of this is no one has been talking about it for the last week until John Mara decided to come out and talk about it, and now everyone is talking about it leading up to Monday Night Football. The thing for me is owners don't have to talk about anything. They don't have to come out and explain anything after games. Like, yeah, they own the team, so they have a right to say what they want. But whenever an owner comes out and says anything, it's just a self-serving thing. It's fulfilling his own vanity. So there's massive irony here in him coming on and saying, hey, Odell needs to stop talking and focus on making plays on the field, when the only reason he's talking is to get that headline, because he has no reason to talk. He's not a coach. He's not a coordinator. He's not a position coach. He doesn't have to come out and break down the game. He's an owner.
I think he's too dumb to realise that the headline is going to come. I actually think that he's like, I'm just having a conversation here. I wonder if he thinks he's actually helping his head coach at some level, and then is blissfully unaware of the fact that this starts the shitstorm and inevitably a backlash, because what we've seen from Odell Beckham Jr. is that he will not take the criticism, and he will not respond very well to that criticism, generally, so far.
Well, here's the thing. Like, they can say what they want about Odell publicly now because he's locked into that contract. But the flip side of that is Odell doesn't have to listen to anything they say to him anymore because he's locked into that contract. And John Mara, like all the other owners with this anthem policy stuff, they don't recognise that them talking about these things is bringing it into the forefront. The whole point of that owners meeting, people wanted to know about the anthem policy that they were going to bring back. And they finally figured out if they shut up talking about the anthem, everyone else has no reason to keep talking about it. So outside of Eric Reid playing in the league, and Eric Reid looked pretty good for the Panthers and he's been fine, and there wasn't really a big story around that, that's gone away. So if Mara just shut up and let Beckham play and let the offense play, it'd be fine.
Let's talk about the Chiefs. We had a brief chat with Sam about that there, but you wanted to talk about how the Chiefs should actually feel pretty good about the loss to the New England Patriots. Ultimately, the Patriots had possession at the end of the game, so therefore they ended up winning it. But what impressed you about the Chiefs?
It's not so much that it impressed me, but it took the best of the Patriots at home in a primetime game when the Chiefs didn't have Justin Houston, their best defensive player, and Eric Berry still isn't there, obviously. So it took the Patriots' best game to beat them. And that's your biggest challenge in the AFC. I know the Patriots haven't been great this year, but once the playoffs begin, they're the team that's going to scare you the most because you've got a young quarterback. And while Patrick Mahomes had a couple of bad interceptions, overall he played all right. I feel like he's someone who's going to play better if they play that game over again. It wasn't like he came in and completely ruined himself and didn't function at all. He made a couple of big plays, and then when they were down at halftime, he came out and hit that deep ball to Kareem Hunt for the touchdown in a precarious position, because if they didn't make a play there, it might have landslided a little bit on them. I would feel a lot better as a Chiefs fan watching that game than I do as a Patriots fan, because it feels like the Patriots need to play their very best just to compete with that Chiefs team.
And yet it's the start of the Patriots, though. It's like the Patriots just getting tuned up, learning what they have in Josh Gordon, and knowing how often do we really have to go to Gronk just yet. You feel like they're keeping Gronk a little bit underutilized for those key moments later on in the season where they will have to throw the ball to him 10 times and make him, because he still looked amazing.
Well, offensively they're fine, but the thing is, defensively is where the big questions are. And the Patriots did a brilliant thing in that game that they always do, that other teams should be doing more of, and they double-teamed Travis Kelce, and they looked to chip Kelce coming off the line. There was one play in the red zone where Kelce got an elongated chip from a defensive end. I think actually it was Dante Hightower, not a defensive end, so a linebacker, where he's pressing him at the line, getting in front of him, not letting him have a free release into the secondary. And then when Kelce goes downfield, he's got a cornerback outside of him and a safety on the other side. So you're putting that much focus on Kelce, and it puts stress on the rest of the receivers there. So yeah, the Patriots' offense is going to be fine, but even when the defense is perfectly game planning for the Chiefs can still put up big numbers. And I don't think the talent is there for them to contain them at all. Offensively, Gordon looks like what we expect. He's a talent above everyone else on that field. He's still not fully in the offense. That'll take a while. But Edelman is back as well, and he looks good too. So I think the offense is going to be fine. My concern is the defense.
Why did they spend so much money in Kansas on Sammy Watkins? Like, what purpose does he serve? Is he a decoy? Is he kind of some magic glue that is freeing everybody else up to do the things they're doing?
Well, no, so you have to understand why they're doing this with Kelce. Kelce is the best tight end in the league, and he's far ahead of everyone else. That doesn't mean the other guys in the offense are bad. It means they can exploit everything you do. So even though the Patriots were doing that to Kelce, the Chiefs were still able to play that well because you've got Watkins, because you've got Hill, because you've got... Actually, Chris Conley is there as well, who's played pretty well. DeMarcus Robinson looks really good. So you've got loads of receiving options there and Kareem Hunt in the backfield. So Watkins was kind of the final piece of the offense. Watkins is a really, really, really good football player. He's a really tough guy to leave in single coverage, leave one-on-one against any cornerback. So it's all about pulling the defense apart and being a part of a greater whole rather than just having his individual numbers.
Okay, so it doesn't matter that they paid him so much money and that they don't really throw him the ball that much. It's that he is somebody that the opposition has to constantly be aware of. And so Tyreek Hill, off you go, do your thing. Here's the ball, kill everybody.
Well, he's had one or two big games this year. It's kind of what the defense dictates. Because when you're against this Chiefs team, you're giving up a mismatch somewhere. And if it's going to go to, if it's Watkins you end up forcing the ball to go to, he'll have a big game. If it's Hill, he'll have a big game. If it's Kelce, he'll have a big game. And that's just the trouble with this offense.
Let's talk a little bit about Jacksonville and Dallas in particular. So what the hell's going on with Jacksonville?
Prior to this game, we pick games every week, and I was actually tempted to pick the Cowboys, but I'm kind of sick of picking the Cowboys at this point because they don't do what you expect them to do every week. The reason I was tempted to pick them was the matchups. The matchups here, specifically Cowboys, Jaguars are later. I know the Jaguars have been bad in other games, but in this game specifically, you look at the Jacksonville defense. It functions primarily on the defensive line overwhelming teams. You've got Calais Campbell, you've got Malik Jackson, you've got Yannick Ngakoue coming off the edge. For the most part, they do that by overwhelming guys physically. Ngakoue, I can't remember his name is. He's mostly comes off the edge, but everyone else there is trying to just body up the offensive linemen and overwhelm them and go right through them. That suits the Cowboys' offensive line because they've got a bunch of big athletes. They've got Connor Williams is the rookie who played pretty well in this game. They've got Tyron Smith, they've got Lyle Collins, they've got Zach Martin. You can't just bully those guys. You've got to try and work around them. So when the Jaguars wanted to try and bully that offensive line, it didn't work. The offensive line for them was dominant in that game. So that exposed the secondary back to 7 a little bit more because they had to cover for a little bit longer without pressure. If you watch that game, you saw Prescott had a lot of time in the pocket, a lot of time to work, and they blew a couple of coverages. Cole Beasley's first touchdown comes off a blown coverage, and his second touchdown comes when the defense rushes only 2 after the quarterback. They tried to play all coverage. Prescott moved them with their eyes and found the open receiver. For the Jaguars, the defense is really good because your outside guys can lock up to longer, bigger receivers, shut them down, and then the defensive line overwhelms you. The Cowboys don't have an outside receiver that they go to. They wanted to work for Beasley and they wanted to work inside, so they were able to work that while getting great pass protection. The other aspect of this is The Jaguars came into the season as a team we thought were going to be challenging in the AFC Championship participants last year, ultimately lost because of their quarterback. And we've kind of talked about them in a different way to the way we've talked about the Cowboys. We talked about the Cowboys all year as if they've fallen apart, the whole season's been a disaster, they're not living up to expectations. They're 3-3. They weren't expected to do as much as the Jaguars. The Jaguars are also 3-3. They were expected to do a lot more than the Cowboys. And I feel this is what happens when you've got a quarterback who is as limited as Blake Bortles. It's not that Bortles necessarily loses you games. It's that your margin to win games is so much smaller. He's not going to be able to cover for you when you make mistakes elsewhere. He had one great game against the Patriots this year, but outside of that, he's been the same old Blake Bortles who misses too many throws and makes too many bad decisions.
Okay, so the truth about the Jags is that they're closer to an 8-8 team than they were last season, primarily because of the quarterback. And the truth about Dallas is that they're actually closer to an 8-8 team as opposed to the train wreck that they were last season.
Yeah, the Cowboys are always going to be tough to trust just because, in that game, the biggest issue the Cowboys had was their play calling. And in that game, the play calling didn't change. It was just that the offensive line was so good that anything they wanted to do would work. So it's going to be more of a matchup-specific thing. They play Washington this week. That'll be more of a struggle because Washington know that offense and know how to react to it better than the Jaguars did. The other thing we need to mention, though, the Jaguars' worst game last season was against the 49ers when, again, they blew a load of coverages and they got confused by mismatches. So this might be more of a one-off for the defense. You just know that offense is always going to be limited.
What about Dak Prescott? Is he back? Is he the player that we saw in his debut season, or is he closer to the kind of not great but slightly like a bang average in NFL terms in last year?
We could do a full podcast on Dak Prescott and the arc of his career, but Dak Prescott is fine. He's fine when he's putting up terrible numbers. He's been fine when he's putting up terrible numbers. It's that whole big unit of an offense that's putting up that sometimes suffocates him, and this time it didn't suffocate him. This week he looked more like rookie Dak Prescott, but that was just because the pass protection worked so well. He's actually been better in his second season. Well, maybe not in his third season so far, but he was actually better in his second season than he was in his first season. The numbers just weren't there because of the offense and the setup there. Okay,
so he is good and we should stick with him. A couple of quick questions. You mentioned the Washington, and last week they beat Carolina, and before that game there was a sense at least that Carolina were going to be at it this year, that they have a really good team on both sides again, very well balanced, and that Cam was back to being MVP Cam. Christian McCaffrey has the most rushing and receiving on that team. You know, he's going to be making the same argument Le'Veon Bell is making at the moment, that he deserves to be paid as both a receiver and a running back when his time comes to get paid. And yet then last week they were just, again, like terribly average against the Redskins. And I guess that's the beauty of the league, is that it's very unpredictable. But what is the truth about where Carolina are at the moment?
I think they're really good, but right now they're dealing with their young receiving core having to grow. DJ Moore had 2 fumbles in this game. Obviously, were both huge in a very close game that wasn't won at the end. Greg Olsen came back, played fine, but they need to grow as an offense moving forward. Defensively, I think they'll probably be better than they've been as well. They just haven't played to expectations so far. I think it's one of the better teams in the league. I think they've got all the components to be one of the best teams in the league. It just sometimes takes the first half of the season for everything to come together. They have to keep playing more because they need him to be a contributor. They can't rely on Torrey Smith. They can't rely on Curtis Samuel. Devin Funchess had a good touchdown catch this week, but Devin Funchess is always going to be one of those guys who's just too inconsistent. So you can't rely on him. You need more to become. And with receivers generally after quarterbacks take the longest on the offensive side to develop into the NFL. If you're a running back, you just throw him in and he plays running back. As a receiver, you've got to be able to understand coverages and adjust to different types of coverage that you don't see in college, so it takes a little bit longer. And Moore was more of a speed guy in college rather than a refined technical receiver, so he's going to take that little bit longer again. If they get right on offense by week 10, 11, 12, and just make it into the playoffs, they'll be a terrifying team for anyone to face.
What about the Eagles then? Last week it seemed like we saw the re-emergence of the Super Bowl winning offense, and yet it was against the Giants, so I'm not really sure I believe it.
Yeah, you pretty much summed that up for me, to be honest, because I don't know what to make of that Giants team. The Giants team played Carolina pretty well on the Sunday. They played pretty well up until that point in the year. See, we had this called meltdown with the Giants last week. Oh, they got blown out, so they're obviously a disaster, and Saquon Barkley was an awful pick and all of this. But they had actually played pretty well up until that point. They played a really tough schedule. So I don't know what to read into that game, and it's not really one I want to have too much of a reaction to, because like you said, it's one game, it's against the Giants, it's on a short week. different teams handle the short week in different ways. So I'm kind of waiting to see.
Yeah, I mean, you can see them having a good season from this point. You can see Wentz getting a bit fitter. You can see the thunder and lightning of Smallwood and Clement actually being a tandem that they use and trust accidentally. The whole notion.
I'm honestly not sure about those running backs as a combination. I know it worked last week, but over the long term, you really need a guy like JJ there in that offense, I think, and he would have had a huge season for them. Generally, teams don't trade mid-season or in-season, whatever you want to call it. I feel like this is a team that should. Like, if you want to try, it doesn't even have to be a David Johnson or a LaShawn McCoy. You just need someone there who's more of a capable bell cow, I guess. He doesn't need to carry the ball all the time, but you need more of a better lead back than what they've got.
Yeah, and there's loads of them knocking about. And loads of them will be available at this point as well, probably for a good bit cheaper than...
One I was going to be really interested in was Marshawn Lynch, but he's got a groin strain now, so I'm not sure. They probably can't trade for him at this point.
Yeah, so the deadline is 2 weeks or 1 week?
Week 8, so whatever week we're at. Yeah, you know me, I'm just stuck in tape this time and there.
We're at 6, so it's 2 weeks, yeah. So I don't know, like, we'll see how his groin injury works out. And there was talk that, he'd like to go to the East Coast and set his brand up there, having done the Pacific Northwest, back to Oakland. It's like brand beast mode. It's something that's very close to his heart, and the Philly fans would definitely take to somebody like him. So maybe that's not just done just yet. One last thing I wanted to ask you about the Rams, the only unbeaten team left in football at 6-0 at this point against the worst team in football, the San Francisco 49ers there, and this is at Levi Stadium. The Rams are winning close games, which is really the hallmark of a brilliant team. And look, they're clearly going to win their division. At some point, do they decide to cool things down a little bit and, have like a little mini mid-season, pre-season, take players out of games and for longer stretches? Or do you just try and keep rolling? Because it's a very long season if you are the Rams and you believe you're going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, based on what they did in the preseason, I imagine they will take players out over the second half of the season. But you say the sign of a great team is winning close games. I think it's a sign of an imbalanced team. I think that offense is phenomenal. I think that defense needs a lot of work. And one of the positives coming out of the Denver game was that Samson Ibukam, coming off the edge, looked really good. And he's a young player who needs to develop for them because they don't have any edge rushers. They got rid of Robert Quinn. They swapped him out for Ndamukong Suh, basically. Suh has been fine. He actually has shown a little bit more of a pass rush than you expect, but they still lack that overall ability in the front seven. Their linebackers can be attacked a little bit more as well, so they need more of a pass rush. And that's going to be a problem when you face better teams in the playoffs. I think the Rams are comfortable at this point because while the Seahawks are, I think, 3-3 at this point, two of the teams they've beaten are the Cardinals and the Raiders, and then they've also beaten the Cowboys in a game where Elliott had a fumble and stepped out of bounds in kind of two freak plays that took away long touchdowns. So I think the Rams are safe to win the division, and Sean McVay is a young, innovative coach. He will probably sit Todd Gurley 2 or 3 games. He'll probably sit Jared Goff 1 or 2.
So that's it. It's not like they're not going to kind of try and just manage their way through the season. We haven't quite got to that point yet where they can have wholesale changes in the middle of the season to, manage them like the Irish rugby team would manage them, for example. Well,
you still have to think about overall seeding. So they're going to want the first seed. They're not going to want the second, third, fourth seed, because this isn't a team that's gone through the playoffs before. This is a team that, they played one wildcard game last year against the Falcons and they lost at home. They're going to want to stay at home. They're going to have to compete with the other teams in the other divisions for that. So once you get to week 13, 14, and you've got 13 or 14 wins, presuming they win out that way, that's when you can start thinking about sitting guys. You can't start at week 9 or week 10 because then you open yourself up to becoming a third seed and having to play during the bye week, or becoming a second seed and having to play an NFC Championship game on the road.
One last thing, the Browns at the Buccaneers, we obviously saw Jameis back and playing quite well, even though they ended up losing that game. Are the Browns playoff contenders at 2-3-1 in their difficult division, or is that just completely fanciful at this point?
I don't think so. I think the offense is lacking in receiving talent, and you've seen that from all the drops that Baker Mayfield has gone through. I think Baker Mayfield is usually inconsistent, and he obviously dealt with a little bit of an ankle issue right now as well. That's probably going to linger for a couple of weeks. He's usually inconsistent because he's a rookie. That's normal. That's nothing to worry about, but it's something that's going to hurt you if you're trying to get the playoffs this year. Defensively, they're phenomenal, but again, Greg Williams is a guy who might sabotage them in key moments, and I just don't trust him. They're on the right track. They're going in the right direction, but I don't think they're a playoff team this year.
Anything else, Cian, that we should be looking out for this weekend?
I think one of the big things is really the Chicago Bears and seeing the direction they're going in. They obviously lost to Brock Osweiler. It was a little bit of a freak game because Albert Wilson just made everyone miss on the second level for 2 long touchdowns. On those 2 plays, Brock Osweiler threw the ball to the line of scrimmage, so 0 yards downfield, and he threw the ball 3 yards downfield, and that was a covered check down. So on those 2 plays, Albert Wilson got 145 yards and turned the whole game around, basically. And Osweiler's passer rating went from 62 to 94.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a freak day. I think that team is really, really good. So long as Khalil Mack gets through this health scare that he has and he's okay, I think they're the one to watch this weekend.
Cian, great stuff. Thanks a million. It's Cian Fahey there. You can follow him on Twitter at CianAF. And of course, he's also got a Patreon podcast that you should subscribe to as well. Now, Sue Murphy is here to try and win us some money and give us some picks.
Well, I hope so.
Is the get loud? Is it if I take it down? Is that going to make a lot of balls fall off?
Yeah. Oh, look at the dust that came off that shelf.
That was great. So this is Sue's bit of sports memorabilia from your team.
Mm-hmm. Super dumb.
Why do you support these guys?
I was in the States in 2006 and I did the East Coast kind of by myself. I went to New Orleans and it was just after Katrina and it was absolutely decimated. It was so sad being there, very emotional. They just opened the Superdome again. It was a year since it had happened, since the whole thing had happened. And it was just, there was a whole feeling about the city and that team and getting back into Superdome, and there was a feeling about Reggie Bush and he was such a legend. Like, not in terms of on the field, I don't think as much, but definitely in terms of the communities, they just loved him. And I was like, I'm always going to go back. So we went back for our honeymoon.
Very good.
My honeymoon.
Yeah.
My important part of the trip.
Yeah.
It was an unbelievable experience. Like, it's just an amazing stadium. And you're in... Yes, against Browns.
Was that a last minute field goal?
Yes. Oh my God, it was really... Because it was a Taylor pass to Landry, and Landry was just unbelievable for that game. Like, it was an unbelievable touchdown. But there was just silence across the entire stadium. It was unbelievable. But yeah, it's definitely an experience.
Okay, so you're picking games for us?
Yes. You're not going to agree with me here.
We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so the Browns are at home to the Bucs. I'm taking the Bucs on that one. They're at -3. I think that's your face says it all. But I'm not convinced by the Browns. I don't know. The Bucs aren't completely together. I think Winston's okay. They had an okay week last week against the Falcons, even though they lost. I think the Browns aren't there on that.
All right, so the Bucs -3.
Yes. The Texans are at the Jags, -5. I think the Jags are going to figure out what went wrong last week. I think Dallas was a unique case for them. I think their defence is good, and I think Bortles on his day can be good.
So you're purposely betting money on Blake Bortles?
I usually avoid the Ravens. The Ravens are the team I never bet on because I just never know what they're going to do. But I think I can trust the Jags a little bit. I think last week was a bit of a freak incident, and I think it's fine to bet them this week.
I mean, that was kind of the case that Cian was making there. It was just that, like, it was purely matchup related. There it is there. Look, Houston at Jacksonville. I'm just not convinced by the Texans. I know they won last week against the Bills, but like Josh Allen went out with an injury. Spread's 5, is it?
Yeah, -5. I think that's beatable. I just checked it again before we came in, and I think they're going to do it.
So sorry, the Bucs are at home and they're -3.
-3, yeah, and the Jags are at home -5. I can't see the Texans doing anything there. And Vikings at the Jets. The Vikings are on the road and it's -3.5. I think the Vikings have been great this season. I think the Jets is still a bit jittery. I like Darnold, but I think he's still in the rookie part of the season. He's just getting used to everything. He's thrown a couple of interceptions. He's not absolutely brilliant. I'd have more faith in the Vikings there.
All right.
I think they might make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they've got as good a team as anybody. It's just that they've been completely inconsistent so far, and their record's not great, so they can't drop too many more games.
They're getting used to a lot of new players though as well. I think they can do it.
All right, so 2 home teams to cover, 1 away team.
Yeah.
Giving points on the road.
Yeah, -3.5.
There's Sue's picks this week.
Stressful.
Picks?
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to go with the Saints, but Saints on the road to the Ravens after last week, I'm not quite sure.
What's the spread?
Ravens are -2.5. So Saints are +2.5 on the road. I don't know, the Saints defence has been a bit questionable.
I don't know what's going to happen in that game. Like, is it going to be a 44-40 and both teams score loads of points and therefore the Saints win, or is it going to be 9-6 and therefore the Ravens win?
It's a bit dodgy. Like, the Chargers was the other one, but the Chargers are in London and you just never know what the London games.
Yeah, don't bet in the London games. I think it's the best bit of advice that anybody could ever have about those ones. Sue, thanks very much. That's pretty much your lot for this week. That is week 7. Week 7, it is week 7. It's week 7, it's coming your way. Thanks very much for joining us. You can tweet the show Just give us your tweets to @OffTheBall. You can use the hashtag OTBNFL, and we'll see you next week. Good luck.